Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inner Athlete Training Podcast. I'm your host, James Jankiewicz. We have a great guest on and a great topic to discuss. But before we get there, just want to remind you to please like, subscribe, and share the podcast. You can find us at Inner Athlete Training on YouTube. You can find it on Facebook at Inner Athlete Training, or you can just go to the website, innerathletetraining.com, and go into the podcast section, and you can find all the podcasts there, where we are on a quest to pursue everything we can to pursue optimal health, wellness, and disease prevention. That said, in that spirit, we have an amazing topic today, and we're going to be discussing nutrition and mental health. And we have with us today Natasha Coughlin. Natasha is a functional medicine dietitian and a holistic health coach. She has a private nutrition practice in Connecticut, working with a wide range of clients with conditions that include everything from autoimmune disease, hormone imbalances, sleep issues, weight management, and has a particular interest and expertise in a variety of mental health challenges, including anxiety, depression, and OCD, and that's what she'll be discussing with us today. Natasha received her MS in Human Nutrition from Columbia University and completed her dietetic internship through Lehman College in New York City. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, James. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be with you today, and I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, as you said, mental health and nutrition.
Yeah, and if I may, I just want to weave a little bit of an introduction. I, too, have a background in nutrition. I was going way back in the 90s, and I remember one of the things I certainly did not discuss was mental health and nutrition. And yet the field goes back quite a ways. You can go back to like the late 60s and the early 70s, where a Canadian physician and physicist, Abram Hoffer, was actually noodling with a lot of this stuff, dealing with psychiatric patients. And he was cranking them up on mega doses of niacin and a wide variety of other vitamins. And he was having an impact, largely not accepted by today's medical community, of course, but he was seeing some success. His work is well documented. And, you know, the real upside to it was, hey, there's no downside to it. Right? It's like there's no lingering after effects like occur when you take drugs and you have some sort of side effect. So this is a topic that's been around for a long time. I know you have done a lot of research into this. So the forum is yours. Let's talk a little bit about your background and what got you into this particular discipline.
Okay, thank you, James. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I know you mentioned the 30s. When I was preparing for this, I sort of read up on that topic a little bit as far as the history of it. And something that popped into my head was even diseases like, pellagra and beriberi and scurvy, which were, back in the, 1700s and 1800s, when sailors at sea were starting to exhibit these, kind of symptoms of, losing their minds. In addition to, their teeth falling out and their skin, breaking out in rash and things like that. And, soon it was discovered that those are the things that can be cured with diet. So those are really the first sort of mental health conditions that were remedied with, optimizing nutrition. So that really goes back, a couple of centuries. And, a discovery of disease called PKU, which, now all infants in this country get tested for it. Before it was discovered, a lot of these infants would go on to have mental retardation just because they couldn't process one of the amino acids in the protein properly.
Right, Natasha. I'm sorry. Explain PKU a little bit for people who might not know what it is.
PKU is phenylketo urinaria, I believe. I hope I'm not butchering that, but it's abbreviated PKU. And phenylalanine is one of the amino acids that the protein that we, the dietary protein that we consume is broken down into. And these babies lack an enzyme that can break down the protein properly. So they actually have a buildup of phenylalanine. And as a result, they eat regular diet with, complete protein in their diet. This buildup of phenylalanine contributes to, mental symptoms. And as I said, it's, over time, as the baby's brain was developing, they would go on to develop, mental retardation, what we call mental retardation, or they would be, developmentally delayed. And once that was discovered, the treatment for PKU is a special protein formula that doesn't have phenylalanine in it. And believe it or not, actually, I've met a person, an adult who was, highly accomplished, who had PKU, and, she was taking this medical food every day in place of her dietary protein. So that's very interesting, real proof that diet, and diet components can treat mental health. So, but I'm glad you asked. Sorry, I sort of went on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that. So please continue. Your history. How did you kind of get into this discipline?
So, so I actually ended up becoming a dietitian a little later in life, not kind of when people usually make that decision, in their late teens, early 20s. When I've always been interested in medicine and health and wellness and everything sort of related to the field. But when I had my first child, who was, this cute, sort of developing little boy who spoke 2 languages. I am Russian originally, so I actually spoke English and Russian to him when he was a baby. And he started to speak 2 languages. And then around age of 17, 18 months, his behavior started to change. He started to lose speech. And he was later diagnosed with autism. So I just, I knew at that time that I needed to do whatever I could to try to help him. And as I connected with the whole sort of forum of children or parents of children with autism out there, on the internet and just through local groups, I realized that nutrition is a big component of treatment of autism. And in fact, I think even to this day, parents of children with autism report that the biggest impact that has been made in their children's lives was going on gluten-free and dairy-free diet. I think something like 70 to 80% of parents report that really helps their children, what we think of, mental health symptoms such as, OCD and perseverations and lack of social skills and lack of language and things like that.
So that's interesting. So it didn't necessarily reverse it, but it inhibited the symptoms?
It improved. The symptoms. And it was very noticeable to the parents. It was very, we stopped gluten and we stopped dairy, and within a couple of days, my child has eye contact. My child said a word, or, my child maybe strung a few words together, into a phrase or a sentence. So things like that. And of course, when you're a parent of a child with special needs, you're so hyper attuned to everything that's going on. So I put a lot of credence into what parents are saying. And I would actually say that for my son, that was probably the case as well. It wasn't dramatic, but I definitely noticed a difference.
That's fascinating. I didn't even hear about that yet, but please continue.
Yeah, and so that was sort of the impetus, I guess, for me to start research. And this was 16 years ago at this point, and I've multiple hours online, probably thousands of hours of research online, and webinars and conferences, and so I've kind of educated myself on everything that's out there in terms of nutrition and mental health, and not just nutrition, but all the complementary, sort of what used to be called complementary and alternative medicine, which we now call functional and integrative medicine. So any way that we can influence behavior by means of changing the diet, changing lifestyle, herbal supplements, dietary supplements, those are all the things that I've researched and, have implemented with my son throughout the years, but also now after all these years are incorporating into my practice as well.
Right. So obviously it goes beyond the spectrum of autism, right? Like, tell us about some of the other conditions that you are seeing some success with when it comes to mental health.
Sure. Yeah. And I have to clarify, I do not work with children with autism in my practice. I sort of made a conscious decision that this was too close to home. Mm-hmm. So I don't, but as autism sort of is a big thing we have going on in our country right now, but things like anxiety and depression. I know I was trying to pull up some statistics, and the numbers are constantly changing, and the trend is not going in a good direction for us. It's rates of anxiety and depression are increasing literally every year, and anxiety is now number one, mental health disorder, and depression is the number one cause of missed work days in this country, if you can believe it. So we're talking about, anywhere between, I think, 18 and, 25 to possibly higher % of population being affected. One of the things that really struck me was the prescription medications that are prescribed for different mental health conditions, and almost 100,000 babies in the U.S. under 1 year of age are on prescription medications that are some kind of, psychiatric medication, which
at 1 year of age?
Under 1 year of age.
Under 1 year.
The number was about 95,000 prescriptions.
But what's their logic there? Are they doing that as a preventative? Like, are they looking at the genes and saying, oh, they might be susceptible to, I mean, what would possibly justify giving somebody under 1 year old?
I think, James, just behavior, parents saying to their pediatrician, my child is exhibiting these behaviors and, they're concerning, and I think we need to do something about it. Or perhaps the pediatrician is noticing behaviors and says, let's do something about it. So it's really, I'm kind of just as shocked as you are. And I don't know exactly what those, the website did not, and it was a credible website. I can definitely pull it up and, post it maybe at some point, but don't know exactly what the medications are and for what conditions, but just the number alone is kind of mind-blowing.
Alarming, to say the least.
And then, of course, as we get older in age, across, the different populations, the prescription medications for, anxiety, depression, and, OCD is a little less common. I think maybe it's 1 to 2% of the population. But prescription medications are rampant, right? And it's just like the conditions are rampant. And everyone always talks about how those are just people who have been diagnosed and who are actually being treated. How many people are out there suffering and not seeking help? So this is potentially a huge, huge issue. And I can definitely attest to that. In my practice, most of the people who come to see me would report anxiety or mild depression or moderate to severe depression when I do my intake forms.
Wow. And when you say adults, that runs everything from teenagers up to seniors?
Yes. And in seniors, now that we're talking about seniors, actually part of my dietetic internship was at a long-term care facility. Depression among seniors is, really, really devastating. And unfortunately in that, in that age group, the faith in the doctor, right, and the faith in the medical system is so strong, and just the idea that this is so common, right? We kind of have to deal with the end of life issues, and I'm on 5, 7, 10 prescription medications for my health conditions, aches and pains. Of course I'm depressed, and of course my doctor is telling me I should be on an antidepressant. Or something like Neurontin is actually a highly prescribed medication in that group, which sort of helps with pain / anxiety. Those are very, very high, and like I was saying, it is so common that it's almost considered normal. But I always like to say, because something is common doesn't mean it's normal. So, and we really have to find ways to deal with it through kind of more natural and holistic means rather than, a pill for every ill. So,
and it doesn't help that the psychiatric industry, the psychiatric industrial complex, for lack of a better word, pathologizes everything. Child's too fidgety, that's a condition. They're too calm, that's a condition. You're getting to the point where there's not a single evaluation you can do where they won't have an accompanying drug to give them. So that's always an uphill battle too, right? So in those conditions, let's start with anxiety and depression. So what are we looking at in terms of being dealt with nutritionally?
Okay, so I think we really, what I kind of like to think about, when I think of mental health is we sort of have this dichotomy of, in the general population, right? People think of the brain as, sort of this mystical, right, thing, right? It's the brain, that's where the thoughts and emotions are born and things like that. And then the, pharmaceutical industry or the conventional medicine thinks of any abnormalities in those, thoughts and emotions as something pathological and just a, chemical imbalance, right? So there's this really, real disconnect between, general population thinking that, there's really not much that can be done about, what the brain is doing, right? Because we don't really know much. It's sort of this thing. And then the industry is saying, it's a chemical imbalance and we have a pill for that. So, but really, when I think of the brain and mental health, right? I mean, brain is part of the physical body. It is not in any way disconnected from the rest of the physical body. So we have to think of it as, this is something that we need to take care of. And, we need to think of brain health, much like, we've been programmed to think about heart health, right? Thanks to the American Heart Association and, Cheerios, right? Messages on the Cheerios. But we really need to think about brain health and how to take care of our brain health because it is part of the body. And, brain is this organ that I think it's, depending on the person, it's about 2% of a person's body weight, but it takes in 25% of the energy that we consume. So it's 2% of the size, but it takes in 25% of the energy. So clearly feeding our brain appropriately is a big part of this equation, right? Because it needs all and the preferred fuel for the brain is glucose, which comes from carbohydrates. And, once it's digested and absorbed and made into energy in the form of ATP, that's what the brain prefers as the fuel. And, not only large, energy requirements, there's a lot of blood flow that goes on through the brain. I think about 20% of the blood, vessels are going through the brain. So it's very highly vascular organ, which is really dependent on the blood flow as well. So we do need to take care of our brain from the physical perspective, right? We need to make sure we take in enough energy. We need to make sure that we're, hydrating enough, right? Because that's where the blood, that's increased blood circulation, which is really important for the brain. One of the things that I like to tell my clients is, a glass of water first thing in the morning, because the brain does sort of dehydrate overnight, right? This is very, we're talking about very micro amounts, right? It's not like your brain shrinks overnight, but we do lose some of that water volume, which needs to be replenished. And, which really helps with, that brain foggy feeling. If we're dehydrated, we do feel, we have that brain fog and inability to focus. So hydration is super important. But just going back to nutrition, just making sure that we do eat enough and, regularly throughout the day. I don't advocate for, a bunch of small meals all throughout the day. I'm a big fan of 3 solid meals with maybe 1 or 2 snacks as needed, as long as we don't go more than about 4 hours without eating. Because we've all been in that hangry state, right? I mean, we don't need a lot of research to prove to us that brain is really dependent on fuel, beyond, even just experiencing that super, hungry and angry feeling, right? When we're really hungry, we kind of turn into, somebody else that we might not recognize.
All right, a monster.
A monster, yeah. So hangry, we all know about hangry. So brain really needs the carbohydrates, but of course the catch-22 here is they need to be good carbohydrates, right? Not the white flour and the white rice and the potatoes, especially in huge amounts, the way some of us are consuming. And, we know that, along with the epidemic of mental health conditions, we have an epidemic of overweight and obesity as well. And actually, I think World Health Organization now announced that, malnutrition is a major concern around the globe, not in the sense that we used to think of the starving, children in Africa and, parts of India and so forth. We have an epidemic of malnutrition, which is really overnutrition in most parts of the developed world. So it's either not getting enough food or getting plenty of food that's all empty calories that provides absolutely no nutrients.
Right.
So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And, I see that as a huge factor in mental health disease right now, just not thinking of our brain as the super sophisticated machinery that needs the right fuel. A lot of us are eating, whatever comes along, right? Whatever is at the drive-through, whatever is fast, whatever is in the box. And then we expect, to feel good, right? But, as they say, junk in, junk out. So junk food makes junk mood. I've heard that too. So.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah. So that is really, brain is so dependent on nutrients that we cannot disregard that. We can't just eat, processed foods out of the box and, chase it with a soda and expect our brain to work properly. Because again, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, I'm a big fan of thinking of it as, we have this very sophisticated body that's, designed to deal with all kinds of things, but we now live in a modern world, which does not match our machinery at all, because we're not getting the fuel that our ancestors used to eat. And, we're not hunting and picking berries and eating foods that are, whole and natural and, free of toxins. We're now taking in mostly, processed foods that our chemistry sometimes doesn't know what to do with. So
right, the ancient body in the modern world. In a
modern world, yes. Which I think really is the dilemma, right? That we're dealing with. So as far as the nutrients, just eating enough, right? Eating consistently, providing those good sources of complex carbohydrates, which, my go-tos are always vegetables, right? Especially more fibrous vegetables like, things like artichokes and broccoli and, winter squashes and things, those things that you really kind of have to sink your teeth into, which means they're full of fiber. And those are the ones that, provide fuel that is absorbed slowly. And that's what our brain likes. Because another issue with with those rapidly absorbed carbohydrates like white flour or sugar, which go into the bloodstream really, really quickly, not only do they affect negatively the blood vessels, because, one of the things I like to think about is, if you think of the blood vessels in the body and a person has consistently high blood sugar, that's like caramelizing those blood vessels, right? They become sort of brittle, and they're not, your blood flow will be negatively affected. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want the high blood sugar after eating those, the sugar and drinking the soda and, cakes and cookies, even, bread that's just made from white flour. All of those are not good for the blood flow, which definitely affects the brain and is a major issue in, memory and brain fog. Certainly In Alzheimer's disease, that's, part of it is the, how the blood system is affected, how the blood flow is affected and how it's, slower than it should be. But also those highly rapidly absorbable carbohydrates also spike stress hormone cortisol, which, consistently high cortisol damages the brain, especially the memory centers of the brain as well. So that's really, there's really nothing good in the white, refined carbohydrates as far as, brain health or just the overall health of the body. And, that's as far as the carbohydrates go. And then another big one for the brain is the fat. I mean, brain is 60% fat, just the sort of the non-water, part of the brain is mostly fat. And it's mostly omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. So I'm sure your listeners, and certainly you, James, I know you know all about omega-3s. Those are essential, right? And they're essential because we need them and we can't make them. Our bodies can't make them. So we have to get them from our diet. And really, there's so much, really high quality research and evidence on the effect of omega-3s on brain health that this is, one of the supplements that, I pretty much, unless there's some contraindication, all my clients take omega-3 supplement for brain health and just for bringing down inflammation in general, which again, we might get to the inflammation part, but that's a big cause of modern disease, and definitely neuroinflammation, meaning brain inflammation, is a big part of kind of what's happening with our brains right now and why, we have these sort of diseased brains, for lack of a better word.
And the fish oil is an anti-inflammatory in that capacity, correct?
Fish oil is an anti-inflammatory, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they also, for the brain, they work in several ways for brain health, and, bringing down inflammation is one of them. But they actually do, I don't know all the exact mechanism, but they participate in just the transduction of the nerve signals, right? Because there's a lot of fat involved in the brain and the neurons, they're all covered with the fatty layer. So fat is really, really a big part of brain and how brain works. So we want to make sure that we get the healthy fats from our diet. So that's, that's where the omega-3s play a role. And they also actually regulate production of some of the neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, which, as we talk more about this, those names will come up again because they're major players in anxiety and, depression, addiction, obsessive compulsive disorder, and things like that. So
Natasha, aside from the fish oil, what are some other forms or sources of fat that we could consume that would be great for the brain?
Well, any healthy fats are good for the brain. So any, mono or polyunsaturated fats like avocados, avocado oil, any nuts, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, cashews, macadamia nuts. Those are all good. I know I mentioned olive oil, one of my absolute favorites. I am pretty crazy about olive oil. There's so much research coming out on olive oil from something actually just came out of Dr. David Sinclair. He's a longevity researcher at Harvard. I know he posted something a few months ago about anti-aging effects of olive oil, how it actually turns on some a group of anti-aging genes. Olive oil is made from olives, which is technically a fruit. So it's really, really high in polyphenols or, antioxidants that we need to fight the effects of just, being alive, right? Or just everyday living and breathing and, taking in toxins and taking in bad food and things like that. So any of those, good oils, as I mentioned, nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocados, avocado oil, And then, of course, fish, we would get the omega-3s and other fats from, in nature, that's why I love to use food, because in nature, it all comes in a package, right? It's not an isolated nutrient. Usually it's, multitude of nutrients that work together. So, things like salmon and, sardines, and foods like that. But, I really do like fish oil supplements for more of a therapeutic effect, because we can get, higher doses in, and, fish, unfortunately now in this modern world, like we were saying, comes with some strains like, heavy metals and some pollutants that we don't necessarily want. So it would be difficult to tell someone to eat fish every day, and might not be advisable due to some of those pollutants that I mentioned, to eat fish, more than 2 or 3 times a week. So I do like fish oil supplements, but you can also, there's algae, there's, for vegetarians, there's omega-3s from algae. So you can actually get algae oil, and, there's things like flaxseed oil, and as I mentioned, some of the, walnuts are pretty high, but they have a much lower conversion into the EPA and DHA. So fish oil would still be preferable. And I actually, some of my vegetarian and even vegan clients, I tried to, convince to give fish oil supplement a try. So
right, you don't have to eat the fish. You could take it in a liquid supplement or a pill supplement, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's a capsule. Yeah, and I usually, I advise my clients on, how much they need, and I have my, I have access to professional brands of supplements, which I like, and I usually try to find the ones that you only have to take 1 pill versus 2 or 3 or 4. So that's really, that really is one of those foundational supplements for the brain, certainly, but also for overall health. So.
And I want to remind the audience too, is that the olive oil especially could also be used topically. Like, it goes on my body as soon as I come out of the shower. I literally, put olive oil on the skin and the hair, and it's got a real deep moisturizing impact.
You can definitely do that. And actually, now that you mentioned olive oil, I think I failed to mention coconut oil. I do like coconut oil, and coconut oil has something called MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, which is a fuel for the brain as well. Again, coconut oil has, that very strong, and I'm talking about extra virgin coconut oil. So it has that particularly strong taste. So it's not really something that perhaps we can incorporate into our diet all the time, but certainly when, you're making something that can use that tropical flavor, I'm a big fan of coconut oil for that. So, and MCTs in general, there's actually a supplement that's derived from coconut oil called MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, which you can actually just take in as a supplement of like 1 teaspoon to a tablespoon a day. And it has been studied in, I know it has been studied in Alzheimer's and has been found helpful. So brain, just, to really, I guess, drive the point home is, brain needs that good nutrition and complex carbohydrates and really good fats. And before I get off the subject of fats, I just really wanted to mention something that I find that not a lot of people know about. When we talk about fried foods and, all those, commercial snacks, right, potato chips and, Doritos and all those processed foods that are fried in oil, everyone thinks that they're bad because they're fattening, right? Because they're fried in oil. So, they're fattening, they're going to make me gain weight. But really the danger in those are the fats, those really damaged refried fats. Because, if that's what we're taking in, that's what our cells and our brain are forced to use as, part of their structure, right? If we don't have those omega-3 fats, if we don't have the good poly and monounsaturated fats from the olive oil and avocado oil and nuts, the body and, every cell in the body has a, fat layer, right? The membrane is a fat layer. And certainly, as I was saying, brain is largely fat. So when we don't have the healthy fats, but we do have all these damaged fats from the processed foods, that's what our brain is going to be taking in. And again, going back to that, junk food makes junk mood. I mean, that's really what happens. And we're talking about the brain in particular today, but certainly when we're taking in those damaged oils, I mean, we damage every part of the body, because it goes into every cell of the body. So that's really the danger in those kind of fats, and it's not necessarily the calories. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think it's a very important message, because those kind of oils and fats really create inflammation in the body, and as I'm sure everyone is hearing, inflammation is the cause of most modern disease.
Right. So in a nutshell, whatever you put in your body is whatever you eat becomes the building blocks of your body. And you're saying with the trans fatty acid, hydrogenated oils and that kind of thing, it's like using a really inferior product in the foundation of your house. And then you're building upon that house, and then everything's just going to come crumbling down at some point because you're not giving it the correct building blocks that it needs.
Right. That's absolutely right. We're talking about every single cell in the body has that fat layer. And if we don't have the healthy fats to make that layer, the building, will not stand to the test of time. And that's how we end up with, handfuls and handfuls of prescription medications later in life. And certainly, our medical system does a great job of, keeping us alive, but not keeping us healthy. So.
Yep. Well said. Very well said.
Yeah.
So what other?
I was going
to say, what other nutrients might we be missing in the brain? So we covered the complex carbohydrate. We covered the fats.
Right.
Anything in the vitamin, the mineral families that?
Yes, absolutely. So, brain. There's really when I talk to someone about anxiety or depression. One of the first things we do is we implement a multivitamin just to make sure that we have kind of all the bases covered, right? We just have that insurance policy because, even when a person is eating the best food, which, almost never happens, but certainly, there are many, many of us who try, we still have, we might have poor digestion, we might have poor absorption. The food that we're eating might not be as rich in vitamins and minerals as we think. So I'm a fan of a multivitamin just to add all of those components in. But if we think of specific nutrients for the brain, after omega-3s, the first thing that comes to mind is vitamin D. And really, vitamin D is, has been called nature's antidepressant. Rates of depression go up in the winter in the northern United States when we don't get the sun. Because we can produce vitamin D, which is actually a vitamin and a hormone technically, after about 15 or 20 minutes in the sun without sunscreen in the summer, when the UV index has to be above 4 for our skin to be able to manufacture vitamin D. We get that if we spend time in the sun. And that's, as I said, about 15 or 20 minutes. And vitamin D deficiency is another, I know I've used the word epidemic quite a bit here, but really, really, really common. And, one of my pet peeves with conventional doctors is a lot of times when I see a new client and they bring me their blood work, I would say, oh, have you had your vitamin D? Oh, yeah, my vitamin D is fine. Vitamin D on conventional labs has a very wide reference range. So it's considered normal anywhere between 30 and 100. So it's happened to me actually, and I definitely see it on clients' labs where a level would be 31. And that client and that, that person is told that his or her vitamin D levels are normal. So it is certainly, if it's too low, it's 30, but it's normal at 31. That just doesn't make sense, right? The math doesn't add up. So if the normal range is between 30 and 100, we would want it somewhere between, 50 or 60, or possibly even 70.
Yep.
So vitamin D, low vitamin D really is, participates very closely in, again, production of neurotransmitters. It is an antidepressant. It has been studied as an antidepressant where, people have gone through, low level and then their levels were optimized to, losing their depressive symptoms. So really well studied, really, really important. One of those, nutrients that, I think vitamin D participates in several hundred different pathways in the body. So that just tells us how important it is. So optimizing vitamin D levels is kind of like one of those, the first line, intervention that I would look at.
I recently just did a whole video on that about like who's most at risk and, the different methods of testing. And you have two different ways of evaluating the levels. So I just remind people all that, if they go on the YouTube site, they will see like a sort of like a diagnostic interpretation, a video interpreting vitamin D and the results and what to look for and how they're measured. So, but go ahead, continue.
Right. And it's important to actually ask your doctor for what that level actually was, rather than just your doctor's office calling you and say everything is normal.
Right.
You want that number. You want to see. And then, interestingly enough, another thing that I just thought of is now that we have more information on our genes, right? And there's a whole field of study that came out in the last, 10 years or so called nutrigenomics. And that's how our genes interact with nutrients in our diet. There's a gene for vitamin D receptor, and I've actually seen it a few times where a person would have a mutation or what's called a SNP in their vitamin D receptor gene, where they don't produce vitamin D well. And even when they take in, regular doses of vitamin D, and I would normally, between the month of October and April here in the Northeast, I would tell people to take, 1,000 to 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. For some of the people who have this SNP in the vitamin D receptor gene, 1,000 to 2,000 IUs does not move the needle on their vitamin D levels whatsoever. So it's good to have that information to be able to then to offer that person higher levels of supplementation to bring their blood levels up. So I just wanted to mention that.
Awesome. Yeah. And when I did the video too, that was a sweet spot too. It was between 50 and 70. What was the actual number. And that's a good point, that you should know the baseline. Just don't let the doctor tell you, that it's okay. You should know what that number is and how it fluctuates from season to season. Obviously, it's going to be different in the summer than it's going to be in the winter, especially here in the Northeast.
Absolutely.
And the one thing too is like, because we emphasize exercise on this program quite a bit, it's always encouraging people, even when it's really cold, to be outside in much of bare skin as they can tolerate for as long as they can tolerate, even in the wintertime. But there's also this understanding that even though you still may get exposed in the winter, you just don't absorb as much. Like the vitamin D production limits itself, even if you do have a lot of skin exposure in the winter. So taking some kind of supplement during the winter is just well advised. And I heard a doctor say the other day too, when he was talking about flu season, he goes, we don't really have flu seasons. He goes, we have vitamin D deficiency seasons.
I think that's a good way of looking at it because, as I was saying, those several hundred processes that vitamin D participates in, it definitely in the immune, how the immune system functions too. So
yeah, big player in the immune system. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So that's vitamin D. I mean, very, very important. Has been studied as a standalone antidepressant, right? And then the next group of vitamins would be the B vitamins.
So if I can just interrupt one more time for a second, like what kind of dosages would be considered, let's say, effective for vitamin D for somebody with depression?
You know what? I'm going to have to look at the literature on that. I don't remember what kind of doses have been studied.
Like, I'm just wondering, does it go well beyond the average, or is it just making sure you have the average amount to begin with?
I think it probably had more to do with what the blood levels, where the blood levels got eventually, at the end of intervention. And, for some people it might be, 1 or 2,000 might be enough. For some people it might be 5 or 10. And in some of those, really deficient, I mean, I think I've seen levels of, 8, where vitamin D was like 8 or 10.
Right.
Some of those people, in conventional medicine, it's not unheard of to do those super high dose, like a one time, like a 50,000 I use kind of load up dose to try to bring those levels up. So,
right. But to remind people too, that should be under the advisement of a doctor, because vitamin C taken in too high doses, because it is fat soluble, can be toxic.
D, James, it's vitamin D. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you said vitamin C. Yeah, vitamin D.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Vitamin D. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you would have to take a lot,
Well,
but it can happen.
I just wanted to clarify that, because, we can't, this, obviously we have to be very precise about what we're saying. I mean, vitamin C and vitamin D are two very different vitamins, as we both know.
Yep.
So I just didn't want someone to misinterpret that, we were talking about vitamin C. So.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And then B vitamins. B vitamins are, I mean, I cannot even stress enough how important B vitamins are. And going back to, beriberi and pellagra and some of those, 17 and 1800s diseases, they all had the, mental confusion and dementia component, right? And the culprits of those diseases are B vitamins, B2, I guess B2 in beriberi and B3 in pellagra. So that's riboflavin or niacin, which are vitamins B2 and B3. So they are always a cofactor in, neurotransmitter production and pretty much everything that happens in the brain. And, vitamins and minerals, we have to think of vitamins and minerals as not the main players, but those cofactors that help everything work properly. And without them, things just are not going to go down, the right way. So, so those vitamins are really, really important. And, but, I usually go for the entire B complex. I don't have people take, individual B vitamins, because they're all work in unison and they're all important. They all play, their different roles. And usually that's how they come in food, right? They don't come, we don't eat nutrients, we eat food. So I like to, when those therapeutic doses of B vitamins are needed, I like to do a B complex rather than just nutrients. And
yep, I totally agree.
And I cannot leave off vitamin B12, because I'm sure that was probably a question on your mind. And, if, your listeners have ever had any neurological symptoms, or had, maybe elderly, parents or grandparents with neurological symptoms, vitamin B12 comes up as sort of the first thing to check, because vitamin B12 is actually helps the brain utilize the omega-3 fats appropriately. So this is where we need that synergy. We can't just have, one or the other. We need optimal levels of omega-3s, but we also need optimal levels of vitamin B12. So, so really, really important for neurological health, for also for, that brain fog feeling, fatigue. People who are low in B12 usually experience fatigue. And interestingly enough, I remember seeing something about, I think, this was an older study, maybe even in the 40s and 50s, where a psychiatric facility, people in a psychiatric facility had a micronutrient testing, and they were found that, a lot of the psychiatric patients, I don't remember the numbers, maybe it was something like 20%, had vitamin B12 deficiency, whereas in the general population, that deficiency is much lower. So that just really shows us, the link, right? There is that correlation with psychiatric symptoms and low vitamin B12. So those are, really all the B vitamins. Something I wanted to mention about vitamin B2, which is riboflavin. It's the vitamin that the bright, if you've ever taken a B complex, it's what gives the pill that bright yellow color. And that's also what will make your urine bright yellow color if you take vitamin B complex supplement. Just wanted to mention that. That's not anything scary. That's just the color of vitamin B2 or riboflavin. But that's one of the vitamins that gets really depleted by alcohol. And as we know, with the pandemic and like everything that's happened in the last, year and a half, alcohol consumption has gone up. In fact, I think something came up yesterday on the percentages and the different strata of the population that increased the alcohol consumption. But alcohol depletes vitamin B2. And one of the things that happens to, alcoholics is that mental, not even in the state when they're actually under the influence, but if someone is an alcoholic and has perhaps has a liver disease, something where the process has gone on for a long time, they become deficient in vitamin B2 chronically, and they experience this mental confusion called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. I know, James, you've probably heard of this. But that is, it's kind of that mental confusion that almost, acting like someone else. And I actually saw a patient, I remember I saw a patient in my clinical rotation who was a, recovering alcoholic. He had an alcoholic liver disease, and he was just having these kind of mental symptoms, and that was, attributed to this syndrome, which really stems from the vitamin B2 deficiency that's depleted by alcohol. So that's just another B vitamin that's a big player. But as I said, I usually like to do a B complex just to provide that synergistic effect for the brain and, definitely the rest of the body too. So.
And then there's niacin, which gives you the niacin flush. Right. And that's what I thought was like fascinating about Abram Hoffer's work too, because he was cranking people up like really high. So they must have gotten a lot of the flush symptoms. But, that's what happens when you take a lot of niacin. You literally feel like a rash is breaking out on you, and your skin gets a little red and you get a little intense, and then it subsides. But I just think that's important for people to know too, that's if they are experimenting with B vitamins, that can happen if you take niacin in too high a dose.
Yeah, and that's actually, that's a good segue into depression because niacin can be converted to tryptophan, and tryptophan is then converted to serotonin and melatonin. So those are big players in depressive symptoms. So vitamin B3, niacin, is a major player in that whole pathway. And definitely, it has been, studied, and, there is a no flush form of niacin that someone can take, but
what fun is that though?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a niacin flush myself, and boy, was it scary. I wasn't sure what was happening.
I did it a couple times just for kicks.
Right. It's definitely, if you want to give yourself a little bit of that rush, take a high dose niacin, you'll get it. So, but it's a major, definitely a major player. And so now, now that we're kind of, let's talk about, depression and anxiety in a little bit more detail. Really, when we think of depression, and certainly if we go to a psychiatrist, which really in this country, most people get put on antidepressant by their primary care doctor, not a psychiatrist. So, when someone has depressive symptoms that they actually are willing to report, because again, there's a lot of stigma, right? And a lot of this thinking that, oh, this is just me, right? This is just me and my thoughts. This is something that I can, control, or I'm a bad person, for thinking these thoughts. So there's a whole, there's a lot of stigma that surrounds, mental health, and definitely, seeking help for mental health. But when a person with depressive symptoms goes to the doctor, they will most likely be prescribed an antidepressant. which, antidepressants, most of them work on something called serotonin. And serotonin is one of the neurotransmitters that, I mentioned kind of in passing earlier. It is something that's actually produced most of it is produced in the gut. That's another misconception, that everything that has to do with brain is, made in the brain and stays in the brain. No, we actually now know that there's this really two-way communication between the gut, and by gut I mean, digestive system, and the brain. So most of the serotonin is actually made in the gut from the food that we eat. So that's where the building blocks need to come from the food that we eat. And I already mentioned carbohydrates and fat, but really, neurotransmitters such as serotonin are made from protein. So that's, that would be another big part of the conversation that I would be having with a client with depressive symptoms is, whether or not he or she is eating A, enough protein, and B, consistently throughout the day. So, we need the carbohydrates to fuel the brain, complex carbohydrates, but we need protein to make those neurotransmitters, which actually help, the neurons fire, and, they produce the kind of what we think of, as, thoughts and emotions, and, how, our mood and things like that. So, really, really important to get protein. I'm a big fan of having protein in the morning. There's a lot of research on that, for brain, for clarity, for, better focus, we really need to start our day with protein. So I really love, breakfast of, eggs and maybe half an avocado and some, sauteed or raw vegetables. I'm not a fan of dairy. Again, there's, we can touch upon food sensitivities a little bit too. I don't really recommend dairy, but, some people, they say they really do well with something like a Greek yogurt. I would, say that's a fine option as well, maybe once or twice a week, because that's high in protein. But breakfast can really be, a protein smoothie. That's, another great option with some, protein powder and some, fruits and vegetables and whatever liquid that you like. So it's just important to make sure that we take in that protein with breakfast, a glass of water first thing in the morning, protein and some healthy fats with breakfast, a little bit of good complex carbohydrates from vegetables. And I really say that, any meal that we have is a great opportunity to have more vegetables. So that would be sort of a breakfast situation, and then making sure that the rest of the meals, whatever, lunch, dinner, maybe another, snack or two that a person might be having, need to have that balance of carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So really, really important for the brain. There are some data on, higher levels of depression in vegetarians and vegans. And that again can be lack of protein, and can be lack of vitamin B12 as well, which is, as we were saying, highly important in neurological health, and only comes from animal food.
Right.
So,
highly lacking in a vegetarian or vegan diet, for sure.
Highly lacking, and needs to be supplemented. There's really no other way to get it. So, so protein is really big. And so it's that balance, that really balancing act of making sure we have the, protein, carbohydrates, and good fats, and all the, these are the macronutrients, and we have to make sure that they are the most, nutrient dense sources of calories that we can get, right? Nothing white. And I know I think I mentioned in passing that, those rapidly absorbed, white flour carbohydrates, they give us that quick energy boost, right? They sort of wake up our brain for maybe half an hour. And then we have that slump, right? And we have that, the brain fog and the fatigue and, that's where we all of a sudden need a cookie or a coffee or something else. And then that's, the cycle repeats itself. And, over time, it really just, it hurts the brain. It hurts the, especially the memory centers of the brain, from kind of what I know from research. So not, those kind of carbohydrates, really not good. So if I said, the three kind of major brain healthy things are, eliminate those white carbohydrates and all, sugar, eliminate processed foods, made with those damaged, factory fried oils, and eat enough protein throughout the day. Make sure that the protein intake is, spread out throughout the day for that, for optimal brain function. And I know James and I talked about it, off air a little bit about Alzheimer's and how.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there is, a lot of research, as you guys know, as you would imagine, there's so much research on Alzheimer's, and I know from pharmaceutical companies that have sort of zeroed in on this one target, the beta amyloid plaque, and they're just looking for something that will dissolve the beta amyloid plaque. Whereas the more, I would say, the functional medicine kind of research has gone off in different directions, and one of the schools of thought is that one of the subsets of Alzheimer's disease is the inability of the brain to take in the fuel from the food that we eat, or take in the glucose, because and it's called type 3. They call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, because what diabetes really is the person eats their carbohydrates, which then goes into the bloodstream as glucose. But the cells can't take it in because they're resistant to insulin, which is like a key that opens the cells to glucose. So what the researchers are saying is, something very similar happens in the brain, where the fuel is available, it's there, but the brain cells are resistant to insulin's action, and the glucose doesn't go into the cells, and the brain doesn't get the fuel that it needs. Which again, as I was saying, 25% of the energy that we take in from food goes to the brain. So you can see how that can be, a really major issue. So, so we can, optimize nutrition, certainly, especially in the earlier stages of, dementia and Alzheimer's. Optimizing nutrition is one of the interventions, and one of the, when I was at Columbia, one of the researchers there is, has done a lot of work on, Mediterranean diet and, Alzheimer's, and kind of how manipulating different dietary, patterns and components to help with the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So that research is definitely going on, and, there's some things, but again, it makes sense, right? The fuel, putting the right fuel into the body and giving the right fuel to the brain, just, makes sense to me.
Yeah, same here. And there's this assumption that you just kind of get it as you get older, right? But it, like every other disease or pathology, none of this happens overnight, right? This is usually the result of, let's say, for the lack of argument, sake of argument, bad long-term habits, that wind up eventually catching up with you, for the most part. I mean, with the exception of genetic predispositions and that kind of thing, right? So
right, but even that, I mean, James, genes, again, going back to the genes. I mean, now, epigenetics, which is the science of how environment interacts with the genes. For most of the diseases, it's being said that even with the genetic predisposition, you still need that environmental trigger, right?
Yep.
So it's like they say the gene, loads the gun and the environment pulls the trigger.
Right.
So yeah, genes are not the destiny. There's still, diet and lifestyle would definitely play a role, especially, over, they're saying that Alzheimer's is a disease that starts, decades before it's diagnosed. So really we have sort of our whole lives to try to, change those dietary patterns and, change some of the, some of the, lifestyle things that we're doing. I know, we haven't touched upon exercise yet, but, exercise is, when we talk about increasing blood flow to the brain, which again, one of the things that might be impacted in Alzheimer's and definitely impacted in depression and anxiety, is the blood flow to the brain. And exercise is the perfect way to increase that. So, one of the lifestyle habits that could probably go a really long way for any mental health condition is exercise.
Yeah, and tons of literature on that. And obviously, because we're called inner athlete training, there's a big emphasis on that. And, people just don't even understand that intuitively, right? Like, you could eat a poor diet your whole life, maybe get Alzheimer's or some other condition. There's a long time between cause and effect. Whereas exercise, you feel that immediately. And no matter who you are, like, you may not even enjoy it, right? Some people may just dread the thought of it and dread doing it. But at the end, nobody regrets having done it. Nobody walks away saying, oh, I wish I didn't do that. Right. So there's this type of endorphin high that occurs from it, that you just feel the immediate effect, and it does clear a lot of the brain fog. And oh my gosh, there's so much literature on it. It's a whole other podcast I'm going to do, but there's so much literature on it in terms of its enriching your cognitive ability for so many different reasons.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that, there's something in the brain called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is, they call it the fertilizer, sort of the brain fertilizer. And really the only way to increase BDNF is by exercise. Yep. So, we don't need any more reasons to exercise than just hearing that, right? The fertilizer for the brain. And really, I think, cognitive decline and dementia are one of I heard something recently where, a whole bunch of young people, I don't remember the age group, but they were polled on sort of what kind of scares you the most as you get older, or kind of as you, sort of go on in life. And so many of them mentioned, getting dementia, right, as they get older. So that's a real, that should be a real sort of a, motivator, right? A real motivating factor to exercise, because we can, increase that brain fertilizer, the BDNF.
Yeah, and it's been analogized to Miracle Grow. You sort of like put it on the brain, and it actually helps neurogenesis. And that's something that, still shocks a lot of people, that you can grow new neurons in the brain just from exercising.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Yeah, we thought the brain was static and we only lose brain cells, right, with each passing day or year. But in fact, we can grow new neurons and we can create new pathways. And, brain is plastic. I think that was sort of one of the things that came out, in the last maybe, 15, 20 years.
Yep, absolutely.
That, the concept of brain plasticity. So,
and the more complex the motor pattern, every time you're learning to do a new exercise and learning to do something different with your body, that's where it really gets pushed. You really increase that BDNF, because it just, the neurological challenge of your body trying to adapt to a new stimulus is really what stimulates a lot of the growth.
Right, exactly. And that's, again, exercise has been studied as an antidepressant, right? As a standalone antidepressant. Yep. And it has been found effective, but it's also been found mostly effective, the types of exercises where you actually have to do something. I can't remember what they call it, but, things like dancing, right? Like a Zumba class or something where you actually have to, maybe use props or use your, body in like particular patterns and things like that. So that can be really beneficial, but also, each person has to find the type of exercise that they would like, that they like and would stick with, right? Sure. That's the most important thing. Because, it can be the best, you can belong to the best gym, but if you're, dragging your feet every day and you're saying, I hate this and I really don't want to be doing this, that's probably not going to be as helpful. But finding something that we can, sustain and stick with, that's really the way to go. And exercise, as is one of those things. You just have to start, right? Once you start, your body that the exercise releases endorphins. And once we like to feel good, right? Humans like the feeling of pleasure, right? That's why we're seeking kind of that endorphin high or the dopamine high. Once you experience that feeling of, really enjoying something, we have the memory, there's parts of the brain that those memories are imprinted on, and we want to do it more and more and more. So I think that's kind of how it works with exercise, but, it does have to be the right exercise for the person, because, again, I work with, especially with women. I mean, they might be in different kind of stages of their lives. There's things going on with their hormones. There's several factors that we need to consider when it comes to exercise, because, high intensity exercise might be great for one woman. And then another one would say, I'm absolutely wiped and, I'm not enjoying this at all. So that's when we'll go to, something like yoga or walking, and then maybe try something more high intensity down the road. But
and that's a good point. Like CrossFit is not for everybody. And so some people, depending on their hormonal constitution, as you were saying, it could destroy them. It'll only make their condition worse.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can talk about hormones, for days, but I mean, someone who is, and this actually crosses over into depression, because, when I evaluate someone's sort of mental health state, I go through this checklist of, okay, is this the kind of the classic blues, right? Is this person just sad? So is this, low serotonin, and we just need to work on lowering serotonin? Or is this person, low in dopamine, and they're just sort of, in literature they call it the blahs, right? The person who doesn't really find enjoyment in life or enjoyment in activities. And there's a difference. There's a difference between feeling sad and feeling blah. So that's kind of a different subset of what a depression might look like. And then, yet another type might be someone who is just completely wiped out, adrenally, right? Someone who maybe has been under so much stress for a long period of time, where they don't even have enough, they don't have enough cortisol production to get them up and going in the morning. So doing any kind of strenuous exercise, just, puts them on the floor. So those are things that, I usually, like to look at and, and evaluate. And, if it is a case of that sort of, what we call adrenal, fatigue, which is, a term that's being used, it's a little bit of a misnomer, but when your adrenal glands are not producing enough, cortisol to get you up and going, so that's where, the right kind of exercise has to come into place. And then, it certainly has to do with mood, as well. So,
yeah. And then you have the people who fall into the category of having, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, a lot of these conditions that were dismissed by doctors for a very long period of time because they just never had an answer for it. So they, when doctors don't have an answer, they're just like, well, it must be all in your head because it's not in our canon of medicinal literature. So, go home and see a shrink or something, right? But fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue were kind of in that category. And I found that with a myriad of clients I trained who had those conditions, if you pushed them just a little bit beyond their threshold, they couldn't walk for like 3 days. Like they were just in bed for the next 3 days, right? Till they recovered. So that was a real wake up call to show you how sensitive some people could be on the scale.
Yeah, because it's really, there's this sort of intricate hormonal balance where, that the whole HPA, right, the hypothalamic, pituitary adrenal axis, right? People have dysregulation, and really, we've been talking about diet for most of this call, but stress. Stress is such a huge issue, and really, we can talk about obviously, treating, anxiety and depression and kind of that feeling blue and blah and all of that with nutrients. And that's all, that can certainly work. And that certainly, plays a major role, but stress, just managing stress in some way, shape or form, because that's another, we are bombarded. We live in a We live in a sort of in a society that just kind of demands stress, and everything is deadlined, and everything is, the more stress, the better. We have the, we almost like, we feel like we'll get a medal, if we're more stressed than the next person.
Right.
So we're like fascinated, we're like, as a society, we're fascinated by stress and by being stressed. So, but stress has real implications on hormones and neurotransmitters and mood. So all of this, everything that we've talked about so far, stress is a major factor in depression. Stress is a major factor in anxiety. There is real, when we talk about depression and the low serotonin, which, as I was saying, if you go to the doctor, you would be prescribed an antidepressant, which in most cases is something called an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which means that it sort of recycles the serotonin that you already have, and instead of sending it for excretion, it kind of puts it back in the cycle. So you sort of have more serotonin going around, and that helps some people. Again, I don't know what the statistics are, but it doesn't work for everyone. I don't think it even works for half of the people who are prescribed the SSRI class of antidepressants, but it definitely has a role. Just to sort of make this a little bit more clear, it recycles the serotonin that we already have. So if the serotonin is low to begin with, you can only recycle that low serotonin, right? It's still not really going to raise it. So we work with, the nutrient, filling in those nutrient gaps to make sure that the body produces, your own, right, indigenous production of serotonin. But also, this is where stress comes in. The nutrients from protein, and mainly the, tryptophan, which is an amino acid, which is supposed to be converted to something called 5-HTP. That's a, sort of a precursor step before serotonin. Then it goes into serotonin and then into melatonin. This is how, depression and insomnia are connected, because again, these are all, metabolites of the same pathway, right? So serotonin first and then goes to melatonin. So if your serotonin is low, your melatonin will be low. And that's why, people with depression usually have sleep issues as well. But with stress and with certain actually genetic predisposition, in some people that whole pathway from tryptophan to serotonin just doesn't go. It actually goes to, from tryptophan to 5-HTP, and then it goes to something, just a side pathway, the kynurenate pathway. So, and it doesn't even go to serotonin. So we really, and that can be, as I said, that can be genetic or just under the influence of stress. And I saw one case where I think this was genetic, and I on a test I saw that this was a young man. Most of his tryptophan was actually going into the kynurenine pathway instead of going into the serotonin. But stress, that prolonged periods of stress can just not make that pathway work properly, and that's how we end up with the low serotonin. And then we're prescribed those SSRIs or, the antidepressants in that class. So stress is such a major issue in all of this. And then, there's cortisol, right? I mean, cortisol is a stress hormone. So when we have that feeling of being stressed, that's the high cortisol, and actually directly damages the brain, and it damages the memory centers of the brain as well. So
yeah, and those excitotoxins too, ironically, and this is the chicken and the egg kind of thing, right? It's like a lot of people who are depressed are depleted in a lot of nutrients. And the question is, does the depression, the impact of the depression deplete the nutrients, or the nutrients depleted, and that precedes the depression, right? Like that's always a tough one to try to put your finger on.
I know. Yeah. What's the chicken? What's the egg? Yeah. And definitely. And then this sort of goes for physical illnesses as well, right? I mean, people who have physical illnesses usually have depression, and vice versa. So it's kind of, what started this whole thing, right? I mean, being depressed over being physically ill, or, being physically ill and then getting, depressed, things like that. So, it's so, that's what's fascinating about all this research is everything is connected to everything else. That's why, the medical model that we have of, you go to a specialist, right? You go to a neurologist outside of your, general practitioner, outside of your endocrinologist, outside of, the next medical specialist. That model just doesn't work because that sort of, only takes into account that one organ that the specialist is trained to treat. So, but, our bodies are a lot more sophisticated than that. So, and I really see mental health as sort of the, it's almost like a, what's the word I'm looking for? I'll paraphrase myself. It's kind of a, an indicator of how the rest of the body is doing, right? Or how, how good of a diet we're eating or how we're taking care of ourselves. Because it's not, the brain will get affected in some way, shape or form if we're not doing, if we're not taking care of ourselves from the, certainly from the physical perspective with the diet and exercise, but also some, spiritual practices and, social connections and things like that. Because again, those have been, documented to be, major sources of, causes of depression. And when it comes to mental health, it's so multifactorial. And it also has to be treated as such.
And Exhibit A is COVID, right? I mean, you've seen an uptick in, depression, all sorts of mental health issues, drug use, alcoholism. The 15 months of a lockdown is just, way too much for a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I know the rates of anxiety have gone up already. I mean, even, during COVID, I've seen some numbers. Alcohol consumption has gone up. And then again, with the alcohol, that's sort of a self-perpetuating kind of thing, right? The more you drink, the more actually, alcohol causes anxiety. And anxiety is one of those things that almost, again, seems, it's so common that's almost thought of as normal, which, it is so not. And really is so dependent on nutrient status. And, I'll share a little bit of an anecdote about myself, which I might have mentioned to you. A couple of years ago, I developed this anxiety over driving over bridges. And, I would almost have a full on panic attack every time I was on Whitestone Bridge, because at that point I had to drive to and from the airport fairly regularly. And I would literally, experience, the heart palpitations, the difficulty breathing and all those kind of things. And I said to myself, what is going on? Like, this is, I've never experienced this before. I need to see what's going on. And, I checked my thyroid, which is, we didn't talk about it, but, that whole HPA axis that I mentioned also includes the thyroid. And, thyroid, especially in women, when you have that, maybe subclinical or undiagnosed case of thyroid disease, that can be a major case of, major cause of anxiety. So that's what I did. I checked my thyroid numbers. I did a micronutrient panel just to see where all my, the vitamins that I mentioned, and more. I mean, this is a pretty comprehensive micronutrient, functional medicine test. So once I kind of got those results, and of course I put the, the protein, balanced meals, making sure I'm eating more fat. I put all those things into place. I started, kind of keeping a journal, paying more attention to just not, crowding my mind with things and kind of writing things down, so that I wouldn't have those, kind of just the, ruminating thoughts and things like that, and that we can get anxious over. And I was free of symptoms within, several months, and that never happened again. And it's been, it's been a couple of years, and I think I told you, James, I went skiing for the first time this winter, because this, skiing was something that I, 2 or 3 years ago when I started to kind of be interested. My kids started skiing. I wasn't even considering it because of my fear of heights and kind of having this anxiety over being kind of on a, up on the mountain. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, this is not, I have definitely no feelings, no anxious feelings over this whatsoever. So I took my first skiing lesson at the end of this winter. And I'm looking forward to taking more when the slopes open next winter. So
that's fascinating.
So it is definitely, doable. It definitely, all these things that I described definitely work. They can be, multifactorial, and there's, some things that, we didn't talk about specific supplements to how I treat anxiety and depression. And, I mentioned some things like, increasing serotonin. So we can start with precursors like tryptophan or 5-HTP. So those are the things that I would do with people who, have the depression, right, the sadness. And then with anxiety, it's usually, in the medication world, it's usually something that would increase GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid. It's an acronym for capital words, GABA, GABA. So usually in people who have anxiety, GABA is low. And I think maybe one of the things that happened to me, in perimenopause, when women in their 30s and 40s kind of start to approach menopause, they're in this period of perimenopause when their reproductive hormones fluctuate, and a hormone called progesterone usually drops off, and progesterone is a major player in the GABA pathway. So a lot of the women my age, in their late 30s, 40s, early 50s, have low levels of progesterone and have low levels of GABA associated with that. So that's kind of a period of life when a woman can experience anxiety. So one of the things we do is, we increase GABA by either giving GABA supplementation directly, or, sometimes I do GABA and something called L-theanine, which is an amino acid that's kind of calming, but also gives you the sense of clarity almost. Like it doesn't make you sleepy, it just makes you calm and just present. So L-theanine is actually really high in green tea. So I recommend to, especially my female clients, to drink, a couple of cups of green tea per day and get the L-theanine that way. So those are kind of, from the supplement standpoint, those are the two ways. One way that I go about depression, increasing serotonin with the tryptophan or 5-HTP, and then with anxiety, it's usually something to increase GABA. And also just, meditation, writing things down. That's a big one. I always tell, especially my female clients, if you have anxiety, just make sure you have a piece of paper and a pen, or maybe some kind of a notebook, both in your main area, like, say in the kitchen, and then maybe in your bedroom as well, where those thoughts, those to-do lists pop up. Just write them down, and just, you have them on paper, you can forget about them, you can stop, ruminating on those, have to call the school, the plumber, the electrician, pick up the groceries, dry cleaning, all this stuff that can go through someone's head, a busy person's head. It really, helps to write them down and just, write them down, and they're on paper. You're not gonna forget about them, and you don't need to be anxious about them anymore. So
right. So in a nutshell, if somebody does feel like they're suffering with some sort of subclinical depression, just do the basics, right? Clean up your diet, stay hydrated, exercise, and see where that gets you. Right. And then if that's not moving the needle, then then probably go see somebody. Right. But you just realize there's so much that the average person can do that they're not doing to begin with, that can get them from a position of, low energy, semi-clinical depression to, a much happier state.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. With the diet and some of those little lifestyle hacks can go a long way. Sometimes, we need to dig deeper, right? In my practice, right. I would check thyroid. I would do the, the micronutrient panel. I would do something like a stool test to see what the gut is doing, because that's another, we have a couple of, exciting developments in mental health, and that's the, role of microbiome, right? All the microbes in the digestive system, they are actually, talking to the brain. There is, something called the vagus nerve that goes between the brain and the digestive tract. And all the microbes, secrete their metabolites, right? Or the products of their metabolism. They actually travel up to the brain and, kind of tell the brain what to do. So, even with the sugar cravings, a lot of times I tell my clients that, sugar cravings don't come from your brain. A lot of the sugar cravings come from the microbes who live on sugar. And if you don't feed them, they will be sending those, SOS signals, right?
Yeah,
like
they want their sugar.
I need the sugar. So that's, there's really, so, the whole microbiome, there's a company that now makes a probiotic that's targeted for depression. Particular strains. I don't remember what strains of probiotics in that formula, but it is has been researched, and validated for helping with depressive symptoms. So that's kind of an exciting thing. And then we definitely can't forget about sleep. That's another thing. Sleep is so fundamental to everything that the brain is doing. I sort of just thinking about a new thing in research that triggered me to think of sleep is discovery of something called the glymphatic system. I don't know if you have you heard of
I
this,
have.
James?
In fact,
Yeah.
I could point the audience to the Inner Athlete Training YouTube podcast site where they all live. And recently I did an interview with a doctor from NYU, Dr. Azizi. It was all about sleep. And yeah, he did go into the glymphatic system, very much like the lymphatic system, but it's for the brain. And it only occurs when you sleep. So you can only get that kind of, brainwashing, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
Only when you're actually sleeping. So yeah, that was a fascinating find. I didn't know about that at the time.
Yeah, that's, I think a few years, I don't know how long it's been, but it's that, when we sleep, brain actually sort of squeezes itself, and that's how it gets washed, it creates the more of that flow for the lymph, and that's how it, washes itself of toxins, right? Because again, when we talk about, brain health, toxins, the ancient body in the modern world, we're dealing with toxins, lots and lots of toxins from the food and the air and the water. And then also the pathogens, infections. There are, brain is not sterile. Now we know that, even though we have the brain, the blood-brain barrier, there are, brain does have the, microflora, and there are pathogens that can invade the brain. And one of the, especially in this area, of the U.S., Lyme and other tick-borne infections can actually be major triggers for anxiety, particularly actually two infections that come to mind are Babesia and Mycoplasma. Those two have been documented to cause symptoms of anxiety. So that's something that can be explored. I would send my clients to, get tested with their primary care or a specialist to do like a full Lyme panel, because it is, in this part of the country, it's very common.
Yes,
so we can't
absolutely.
overlook that part.
There is so much more to talk about. We'll have to have you on again, but I do want to ask you one final question before we wrap it up, Natasha, is
Sure.
Given the brain requires about 25% of the body's energy from glucose, what are your thoughts on ketones as a source of energy for the brain?
Source of energy for the brain. I'm glad you asked, and that's definitely something that I wanted to touch upon. So let me do that very quickly. So ketone, that's an alternative for the brain. Preferred fuel is glucose. The brain can run on ketones, which is a sort of a product of fat burning. They're called ketone bodies. And really, I'm not a big fan of ketogenic diet just as a kind of as a lifestyle thing, for weight loss or for any kind of prolonged period of time. But it definitely from, everything that I know, it makes a lot of sense to me that changing a source of fuel for the brain can give it sort of a fresh start, if you will. So, ketogenic diet has been used as a treatment for epilepsy, right, or for seizure disorders, which again, seizures are kind of misfiring of the brain, right? So if switching from glucose to ketones can kind of calm down that activity, it definitely makes sense that it has some kind of a therapeutic effect on the brain. So I actually, even myself, I do use, sometimes I use ketones like as a supplement in my tea or in a smoothie in the morning. I like the MCT oil kind of as a way of, fueling the brain with the fat as well. I can put that in my coffee or put it on my, whatever breakfast that I'm having. So, so I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm very well versed in ketones, but it makes a lot of sense to sort of try to change the fuel source to see, and you're certainly, if you're dealing with some kind of a brain pathology, right, and there's a diagnosed condition, definitely something that might be worth trying.
Yeah, and the people who advocate ketone body, the diet rather, they swear by living off of ketones as a source of energy. They just say it's preferred to glucose. Don't know if that's true, but that comes from a lot of their literature and understanding. And then one last thing then, real quick, intermittent fasting. Does that play a role in any of this in brain health?
Yeah, intermittent fasting again is very individualized, right? There are people I would recommend intermittent fasting to. There are people I wouldn't. Usually, it's a good way to lose weight, right? I'm all for giving the body sort of a break from digesting food, because there is that, process of autophagy, right? Or sort of the cell recycling and cleaning. So there's a lot of, positives, but, again, people who have any kind of blood sugar dysregulation, I wouldn't recommend that to. People who may be in that adrenal fatigue sort of state, which that's a lot of women actually, I wouldn't really recommend that to. So I don't really, I don't know kind of literature on that specifically for the brain. But again, the autophagy piece does make sense, the cell renewal, sort of cleanup.
Certainly.
So I think in a, healthy person who is able to do that, and certainly if it's something mild, like a 12 or 13 hour overnight fasting, I don't see any downside to that whatsoever. I think that's all positive. But again, you have to, I would look to, I would take their history and see if there's any blood sugar issues, because there are some people who, cannot go, without a snack before bed, or they wake up with an anxiety attack. So, so there are those cases where we kind of have to really look at it on a case by case basis. But something to explore, and really, we are all our own sort of best advocates, right? And trying things and seeing what works for us is really, a beneficial way to go. Because sometimes the doctor or another health professional they know what they know, but they don't know you as well as you know yourself. So,
sure.
Sometimes we need to try things that make sense. Right? Things that have some backing and some research behind them. And intermittent fasting definitely has some research. It's not as strong as some of the proponents are saying, because really, if you dig the, PubMed or other databases, there isn't that much, but I think the autophagy piece has been, documented, and it does help with the cellular clean out. So I do suggest it to my clients who seem to be a good fit for it and who would actually be able to sustain it. So,
Natasha, there's so much more to talk about. We'll have to have you back. In the meantime, how can people reach you? How can they find you?
So my website is www.integrativehealthrd, as in registereddietitian.com. So that's really the best way to reach me. I am on Instagram as well, just Natasha Coughlin. I post recipes, and, I love to cook. I love to create healthy recipes. because it's, again, I'm a dietitian. I sort of went into this field because of the love of food and love of science. So Instagram is a good place to find me. My phone number is on my website, or you can just reach out through there. But really, those are two places where I can be reached. And if anyone needs any help, I am passionate about nutrition and health and how much we can do with nutrition for optimizing health. So I would love to hear from anyone who needs help. So thank you, James. Thank you for having me. This was really, really fun.
Natasha, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And we will have you on again because there's a lot more content to discover, especially when it comes to nutrition and brain health. So thanks again. Absolutely. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, James. Would love to do it again.